So welcome everyone to this webinar on activity options for action plans on cross-cutting issues of specific Stockholm Convention articles. This webinar is part of the global knowledge sharing activities conducted by the Green Growth Knowledge Partnership that we call GGKP under component 4 of the GEF-funded UNEP-led project on global development, review and update of national implementation plans under the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants, which we all know as the Global NIP Update Project. My name is Fabienne Pierre. I'm the coordinator of GGKP and manager of the Global NIP Update Project here on Component 4, and I will be your moderator today. And I would like to thank all the participants for registering and joining us today for this webinar. As you may know, this is the fourth and final session of our Action Plans webinar series. You can actually explore previous webinars, 3 of them that were focused on individual pub groups on the Global NIP Update Project website. So I invite you to do that if you didn't have a chance to attend those 3 webinars. In this series, we have been emphasizing the importance of an integrated approach as well as of the diversity of options to be considered in action plans and the role of cooperation and awareness raising. So today, as you may have seen, we have 3 complementary objectives. The first one is to introduce activity options for action plans on cross-cutting issues related to specific Stockholm Convention articles. So here complementing the previous 3 action plan webinars on individual pub groups. And this will be led by Dr. Roland Weber, POPs and NIP experts, POPs Environmental Consulting. Our second objective is also to provide insights into IPEN's awareness-raising materials and activities on POPs and other pollutants, which can support NIP action plans and related efforts, including a case study from Armenia. This will be led by our 2 speakers, Dr. Therese Carrison, Science and Technical Advisor at IPEN, and Ms. Gohar Kojayan, Co-Chair, IPEN and Communication Specialist, who will be presenting those materials and activities. And lastly, we want to provide insights into strengthening chemicals and waste management through sectoral approaches with interlinkages between the Stockholm Convention and the NIPs and other international conventions and the global framework on chemicals. And here my colleague, Ms. Michaela Paun, Program Management Officer at the Agri-Food and Health Unit of the Chemicals and Health branch of UNEP, will be telling us about a forthcoming publication. Just a little bit of housekeeping rules here for this webinar before we start. This is happening on the Zoom platform. As you can all see, it will be conducted in English and recorded. It is also supported with interpretation in French, Spanish, and Russian. So please feel free to select your language in the bottom panel of your screen. As you can see, the symbol on the bottom right of the screen. And please note also that I have here my colleague Somin Bai, who will be here technically facilitating this webinar and available to support us in case of any question or need for support. Once we start, please feel free, and I see that some have already started doing this, to introduce yourself in the chat. It's also a great opportunity today to meet colleagues from all over the world. After the speakers' presentations, we will have a session for questions and answers. This will provide us with a space for discussion and peer learning. And as always, the materials and resources, including the video recording of today's webinar, will be made available through GGKP's knowledge platform. And with that, I would like to, with no further ado, invite Dr. Roland Weber to take the floor. Thank you very much.
Yeah, good day, everybody. Can you see that my slide moved? Okay, then we come to the first presentation. It is on activity options for action plans for cross-cutting issues of specific Stockholm Convention activities. Here, the first part. We already had these 3 webinars where we have introduced the activity options of action plans for all the major POP groups. One action plan webinar was on POP pesticides and PCBs, one on POP PFASs and unintentional POPs, and one on brominated and chlorinated POPs plastic additives. So these webinars inform on major activity options for these POPs and cover a large share of the overall action plans. So they have been recorded and they can be accessed in 4 UN languages on the GGKP website and on YouTube. But there are some further action plans, including action plans on specific convention articles and cross-cutting issues, which will be addressed in today's 4th and last action plan webinar for the Stockholm Convention NIP. So for that, I have used the outline of the guidance for developing a national implementation plan for the Stockholm Convention and also the NIP harmonized template, which suggests an action plan structure addressing individual POPs or POPs groups and then the specific other cross-cutting issues we will have today a look on. The NIP harmonized template include also a template for the action plans, considering here objectives, activities and performance indicators for the action plans, but also timeframe, implementer and resource needs. I will go through this suggested structure and would identify objectives and activity options for those action plans which were not yet covered by the other 3 action plan webinars. Here, when you look to the first 4 action plans, you see number 3 and number 4 were already in the other webinar. This is here number 3 is on POP pesticides, number 4 and PCBs. So therefore today we start with the action plan on institutional and regulatory strengthening measures and on measures to reduce or eliminate releases from intentional production and use. So regarding action plan on the institutional and regulatory strengthening measures, first, all the 3 webinars on the action plans of the different POPs group already contain action options for the regulatory frame for the individual POPs groups. In your action plans, you can decide whether regulatory measures for individual POPs are combined in this regulatory action plan or whether these regulatory activities for specific POPs should remain in their respective POP specific action plans. Yeah, you check what is better that your people have the best overview. There are also general considerations on institutional and regulatory strengthening, and for these general considerations, I will suggest here objectives and activity options. So here, suggestion for the first objective: legal and policy framework on POPs and other hazardous chemicals are assessed, updated and harmonized. So when you include here also other hazardous chemicals or POP-related chemicals, it is a good synergy with the global framework on chemicals. And recommended activity options could be compile and assess existing national legal instruments relevant for the life cycle management of POPs and other hazardous chemicals. Then to develop or update a national profile on chemical management. So that would also be a good synergy with global framework on chemical. Review existing legislation on management of POPs and other hazardous chemicals in selected other countries. Then update and promulgate regulations to eliminate the production, use, import and export of all the listed 37 POPs, but also considering here the exemptions you might need. Improve or develop an overall chemical regulatory framework, including the assessment of chemicals in use and new chemicals. So often only the new chemicals or new pesticides are assessed, and you have maybe already thousands of chemicals which are used and are not newly registered, but both type of chemical groups should be assessed. And you assess them for their pop properties, but also you can assess them for the other hazardous properties and implement the global harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals. Because here in this GHS, you have this kind of classification on different hazard phrases. Second objective here for institutional and regulatory, the responsibility of ministries and other authorities for the life cycle management of POPs and other hazardous chemicals are harmonized. The recommended activity options would be assess the responsibilities of ministries and institutions for the life cycle management of POPs and also the gaps and the overlaps in the implementation. Address the gaps and overlaps and improve capacity for the life cycle management of POPs. Then an activity on develop training materials for POP regulations, also training materials for other hazardous chemical regulations when you want to do a GFC synergy, and conduct trainings and workshops for ministries and other regulatory and implementing governmental institutions. Additionally, we also need to inform other stakeholders, to inform, sensitize, and capacitate stakeholders on legal requirements and on the enforcement and compliance of regulations on POPs and other hazardous chemicals. So here, the recommendation activity options would be to develop of information materials on regulatory frame and requirements for the POPs groups, tailored for industry and possibly other stakeholders. Then to capacity building and training of regulatory frame for relevant POPs, other hazardous chemicals, for industries and other stakeholders groups. Coming to the second action plan, that's on the measures to reduce or eliminate releases from intentional production and use. So the background of this action plan is that there are several POPs with exemptions for production and use, like PFOS or PFOA, medium chain chlorinated paraffins, UV328 or DDT. So they might still be used in your country or even produced. So if these POPs are produced or used in production or in products exempted, then relevant releases and pollution can occur with the generation, including of contaminated sites. These POPs also pose a risk, of course, of exposure to workers. For example, when metalworking fluids or firefighting foams are used or pesticides are applied, there is a high risk of exposure. So therefore, a party need to know the production and use of POPs and take measures to minimize the release and the exposure. Objective 1 option would be current production and use of POPs are known, and releases are evaluated and options for reduction and eliminations are compiled. The related activity options could be assessment of production of POPs and associated releases to air, water and waste. There will be not many countries which really have a production. And also then for this production, evaluate options for reduction, eliminate or release of POPs from these productions. Then assessment of the use of POPs in production and products and the related releases. So this is becoming more and more important with this exemption, especially the huge exemptions for medium chain chlorinated paraffins and the large production of it. And evaluated options for reduction of POP releases from the use in production and in products. So if you ask for this exemption, then objective 2 is BAT-BEP is applied. BAT-BEP is best available techniques, best environmental practice, is applied in exempted production and use to reduce and eliminate releases. So here, when you look to the hierarchy of hazard control or hazard chemical control, you see the BAT-BEP is not the preferred one. It is so-called engineering control. More preferred would be substitution and elimination, but we already considered, okay, you have already evaluated, you do not have a substitute, you do not know how to eliminate, so therefore we are implementing then BAT-BEP for the use. Here, the recommended activity options would be define and implement BAT-BEP for the production of POP, including release limits, and develop control of production, related releases, and also waste management. Then define and implement BAT-BEP for the use of the respective POP in industries, including release limits, and develop related control of the use of this exempted POP, the releases, and environmental sound management of the related waste. Then to do capacity building of industries and especially workers on BAT-BEP, and how to control and minimize the releases of POPs. And implement measures to minimize and eliminate exposure of workers in the production and use of POPs and the related education. But also one activity when you have an exemption, you always have a look at, means continuously look for alternatives and substitute when they become available. Yeah. So normally you ask for exemption for 5 years. Yeah. But maybe after 1 year, there's also already a substitute. So if you see a substitute, maybe then you can also earlier phase out the POP. Then we look to further action plans. Here, the fifth one is on the brominated POPs. We already have had a webinar you can look at. And also the seventh is on the polychlorinated naphthalines. So for that action plan was included in the PCB action plan. But what we have not addressed in the last 3 action plans were an action plan on production, import and export, use, stockpiles and waste of hexachlorobutadiene. Yeah? Hexachlorobutadiene was listed in 2015 in Annex A without exemptions and was listed in 2017 then in Annex C. The major use of hexachlorobutadiene was and is the production of chlorinated solvents. Yeah, for example, tetrachloroethylene, trichloroethylene, tetrachloromethane, and others. And the related waste and landfills from former production. Why I highlight that this is an important action plan is that we have seen in the recent years that the hexachlorobutadiene level have strongly increased in Arctic air over the last 15 years. And now hexachlorobutadiene is the POP with the highest levels in Arctic air of all POPs. So the hexachlorobutadiene inventory guidance stresses that in particular parties which have or had productions of organochlorine compounds, especially the solvents, should establish detailed hexachlorobutadiene inventories and assessment. Other parties that have neither current nor past production of related organochlorines in their country are not expected to have major hexachlorobutadiene production release or stockpiles. So therefore, when we go to the first objective, this means established policy and regulatory frame to stop the use and to control hexachlorobutadiene in the industrial processes, production and waste. There is a recommended activity option on assessment of regulatory frames for controlling hexachlorobutadiene from organochlorine production and restrict the recovery of hexachlorobutadiene as product by separation of hexachlorobutadiene from the chlorinated solvent production. Yeah, actually hexachlorobutadiene was only produced in history by this kind of side product in the solvent production and then separation. Yeah, and here a country which is producing here the solvents and where companies might have the possibilities to separate, the country should restrict these kind of separation and that hexachlorobutadiene cannot be brought to the market. Then amending existing laws or develop new laws for the control and management of hexachlorobutadiene. This could include setting limits for hexachlorobutadiene, for example, in emissions in organochlorine productions, or limits for low POP content in waste, or limits for unintentional trace contaminants, for example, in the solvent itself. And then restriction, the major products containing hexachlorobutadiene, and production processes. Yeah, so that's also one major aim of the Stockholm Convention. If you have a product which generates huge amount of unintentional POPs, you might look to substitute it, and you can look at the moment to the US EPA, which have larger activities on the perchloroethylene and the trichloroethylene. I have put you the fact sheet there. And therefore, for the objective 2, inventory of hexachlorobutadiene is established and data are appropriately managed and coordinated with other release inventories. I have separated this in 2 different type of parties. First, the recommended activity option for parties with organochlorine production. So this is only for a few parties. Assessment of the management and quantification of current waste residues from the production of chlorinated solvents and related organochlorines and their destruction. And important assessment of historic management of residues from plants where chlorinated solvents and other chlorines were produced, including related landfills. Because in history, huge amounts of these hexachlorobutadiene, hexachlorobenzene waste have been generated and have generated large landfills, but also related contaminated sites. And as a last activity, assessment of hexachlorobutadiene concentration in the produced chlorinated solvents coming on the market. And for other countries, for other parties without chlorinated solvent production, there is, in my opinion, only one reasonable activity. This is the inventory of import of hexachlorobutadiene in chlorinated solvents. Because most countries are importing perchloroethylene or trichloroethylene, and because you use them, for example, in dry cleaning or in degreasing of metals and other uses. And therefore, this would be the inventory for the countries which do not have their own production. This assessment would be within the frame of unintentional POPs because these solvents and wastes also contain other unintentional POPs like hexachlorobenzene and the pentachlorobenzene and polychlorinated naphthalenes. So just recently, a Chinese professor Gurui Liu from Academy of Science published an assessment of hexachlorobutadiene in solvent productions in China. And in this publication, for the first time, impact factors for hexachlorobutadiene in trichloroethylene and perchloroethylene production, but also in the products, were published. Yeah. So he estimated that in total per year around 3,100 to 5,500 kilogram of hexachlorobutadiene were kind of sold in this trichloroethylene and perchloroethylene. Yeah, and this is then finally when you import these, imported into your countries. And with these impact factors, you can do, let's say, an inventory of your trichloroethylene and perchloroethylene import and production. The third objective in the action plan on hexachlorobutadiene would be the substitutes for chemicals releasing hexachlorobutadiene. Like I said, the US EPA is quite active, but also the European Union had activity on the substitution, and we have published here in our 20 case studies for the Mediterranean how to prevent the use of toxic chemicals, also substitutes for perchloroethylene, where you can have a look at. I've put you the link. So the objective here would be the use of substitutes or modified materials, products and processes to prevent the formation and release of hexachlorobutadiene. And the recommended activity option would be substitute perchloroethylene in dry cleaning. So in most of countries you have dry cleaning with alternatives. There is, for example, the alternative to use liquid carbon dioxide or wet cleaning or other hydrocarbons and solvent-based systems. And then for other uses, also do an assessment and substitution of the use of perchloroethylene and trichloroethylene in other chlorinated solvents, for example, in the degreasing of metals or as lubricants and in other uses, by alternatives where feasible. So if still it's not feasible to substitute in your country and you still want to use perchloroethylene in dry cleaning or in degreasing, then BAT-BEP should be applied for production and use of these chlorinated solvents. So here the recommended activity options would be apply best available techniques, best environmental practice in the production of chlorinated solvents and implement control measures for releases and for waste management. Ensure that hexachlorobutadiene containing waste is destroyed in an environmental sound manner. And apply BAT-BEP in the use of chlorinated solvents containing hexachlorobutadiene in dry cleaning, in metal degreasing, and in other uses. Then last activity is sites contaminated with hexachlorobutadiene are assessed and managed. Hexachlorobutadiene contaminated sites are legacy from organochlorine solvent production, especially. In some cases, we have really huge quantities of several thousand tons of hexachlorobutadiene and hexachlorobenzene waste, which were disposed by industry in landfills. Also in Europe, we have these kind of landfills. Due to the relative high volatility of hexachlorobutadiene and also relatively high water solubility, these landfills cause environmental pollution and risk. Yeah, so normally when you have dioxin in a landfill, it normally stays in the landfill, but hexachlorobutadiene is water soluble in milligram scale and it's also volatile. So therefore, these contaminated sites are, let's say, increasing and are releasing. Then hexachlorobutadiene and other co-deposited unintentional POPs like hexachlorobenzene and polychlorinated naphthalines, they are highly persistent and the contaminated sites have the potential to impact human health and the environment for generations. So therefore, objective 5 is sites potentially contaminated with hexachlorobutadiene are identified, assessed, and managed. The recommended activity options would be assessment of hexachlorobutadiene contaminated sites from organochlorine productions, establish conceptual site models for hexachlorobutadiene contaminated sites for further assessment and management, and establish a legal frame that implements the polluter pays principle for contaminated sites and related remediation. Last activity here, secure contaminated sites to stop exposure from ground and drinking water and also from vapor intrusion in buildings. Yeah, there's one big case in the UK where there was a landfill with hexachlorobutadiene and other unintentional POPs, and then afterwards a village was built on that place. And the hexachlorobutadiene, which was disposed more than 50 years ago, it evaporated and went into the buildings. And finally, the buildings partly had to be demolished. Possibly remediation of the sites in an environmentally sound manner. Coming to the next action plans here. Number 8 is for short and medium chain chlorinated paraffin. We had in a webinar already also for P4A and for PFOS and also for DDT. Yeah, so for all 4 of these action plans, you can look into the former 3 webinars. Then for next one is to register for specific exemption and assess the continuing need for exemptions. And next is measure of unintentional production. So unintentional production we already had. Yeah. So therefore, I come to the action plan on to register for specific exemption and assess for the continuing need of exemptions. So here, Article 4 of the Stockholm Convention required the establishment of a POP register for the purpose of identifying parties that have specific exemption listed in A and B or B. The number of listed POPs with specific exemption and acceptable purposes are increasing. Yeah, DDT, PFOS, P4, MCCP, Decloran Plus, UV328, DKBDE, and also recycling of PBDE of 209 are still exempted. So An informed decision needs to be made if an exemption is needed, taking into account alternative chemicals and non-chemical solutions. If, following an assessment, an exemption is required, the Secretariat of the Stockholm Convention and the COP must be informed and the exemption registered. So therefore here, for objective 1, an informed registration process is established for the required exemptions for POPs, and the need for individual exemption is evaluated. Activity options are science-based assessment. If any exemption for the use of chemicals listed under Annex A and B is needed, involving relevant stakeholders such as regulators, industries, scientists, and NGOs, prepare a notification for the BRS Secretariat on specific exemption or acceptable purposes if needed. So here, the notification of the BRS Secretariat on the need of exemption for the respective POP, including the appropriate information, would include following information: what exemption, then the estimated quantity of products and use, the purpose of the production and the purpose of use. So not just say, yes, we need an exemption of MCCP, but also what kind of exemption for MCCP and what amount you think you might use within a year, and the reason for exemption. And then, as activity, conduct periodic review to assess the need for continued exemption, considering available alternative, and stop the exemption and use by more sustainable alternative as soon as they become available and it is feasible for you to substitute. Next action plans are on identification and management of stockpiles and identification of contaminated sites. For both of these action plans, activities were introduced in action plan webinars on the individual POPs. So you as a party can decide if in your NIP whether to include these activities in the action plans of the individual POP. This means to have in the PCB action plan also a part on contaminated sites, or in the pesticide action plan a part of contaminated sites, or if you include all activities on contaminated sites in the cross-cutting action plans for contaminated sites and for the management of stockpiles. This you can decide. First, on stockpiles and waste. The background is, in addition to remaining waste and stocks of PCB and pesticides, larger volumes of waste and stocks containing brominated flame retardants and other plastic additives have been generated, and the volumes of those are larger than PCBs and pesticides. Yeah? A similar situation exists with PFOS and PFOA, where we have these firefighting foams, we have carpets, textiles, leather, paper, and so on. And here, when you consider about PFAS, the Global Framework on Chemical has all PFASs as an issue of concern. Therefore, all PFAS-containing waste should, in an appropriate way, need to be managed and need to be destroyed. Because especially the PFAS, they are water-soluble, and therefore, when you dispose them in landfills, they leach out and finally go into your water and groundwater. And waste containing these POPs and other chemicals of concern need to be managed. Activities for the management of POPs specific waste are listed in the individual action plans and would be linked. But there are then also some generic activities. So the first objective is here to have a regulatory frame for identification, separation, handling, transport, and sound disposal of POPs waste is established. Recommended activity options would be compile information of regulatory frame for selected countries for POP and hazardous waste, adapt or modify your legislation for safe handling, transport, storage, and disposal of POPs containing waste. And when you look here to the POP life cycle, you can do that also for other hazardous waste if you like. Then objective 2 is safe life cycle management of POP containing waste is established, and POPs waste is handled, collected, transported, and stored in an environmentally sound manner. The related activity options would be compile guidelines for life cycle management for waste containing POPs. So these are the Basel guidelines. We have Stockholm guidelines, but there are also more. I will show you at least one or two. And develop capacity for POP and hazardous waste management in the country. Establish collection scheme for POP containing products and waste. Establish separation of waste categories containing POPs. For example, very important, you have huge amounts of electronic waste. Yeah, so the POPs are then in the plastics. So you have to separate then there the plastics. And in the plastic, only a share of the plastic is contaminated. And also there we have BAT-BEP guidance, which explain you how you can separate these kind of plastics. Then identify appropriate storage facilities for interim storage if needed. And objective 3 option is option and limitation for the destruction of POPs and other hazardous waste in the country is assessed, and technologies or export for individual waste categories is selected. Before, many developing countries have just exported PCB waste. Yeah, but when we come now to this e-waste plastic, which are huge volumes, you will not be able to export all these POP containing waste. So therefore, this kind of evaluation on the option and limitation of the use of cement kilns, incinerators and other combustion and non-combustion technologies in the countries are conducted. Upgrade of facilities to destroy certain waste fractions containing POPs. Also for our cement kilns, you need to do some upgrade, at least in respect to management. Then clarify which POP containing waste cannot be treated in the country and require still export. For the destruction, disposal and export of POPs containing waste, the suggested activity options are destruction of POPs containing waste in environmentally sound manner. Yeah, that's the sentence is quite simple, but finally the implementation is tough and difficult. Yeah, export of POPs which cannot be treated in the country following Basel Convention procedure, or otherwise dispose of POPs in an environmentally sound manner when destruction or irreversible transformation does not present the environmental preferable option. Yeah, I have put here some guidance here from Basel Convention, but also from Stockholm Convention. And additionally here, the guidance on pre and co-processing of waste in cement production. Yeah, that's probably the most detailed guidance of the co-processing here from GIZ together with Lafarge and Holcim. Then, coming to the action plan on contaminated sites, the objective here is regulatory frame for POP contaminated site is established. Recommended activity options would be develop or update legislation to set out the criteria for determining contaminated sites for individual POPs in the overall frame of contaminated sites, contaminated soil, sediments and water. Develop legislation on liability, mean polluter pays principle, related to contaminated sites and responsibility for the cleanup. Objective 2 is methodology for identification and prioritization of sites contaminated with POPs is selected and applied. And we have here now this guidance on BAT-BEP for POP contaminated sites, which have been published this February. So the recommended activity options here are use the POP inventory process and the Stockholm Convention BAT-BEP guidance to systematically identify and assess POP contaminated sites. Compile a list of potential contaminated sites and develop conceptual site models for relevant sites. So this conceptual site model methodology is described here in the BAT-BEP guidance. And then as next activity to do a prioritization of POP contaminated sites. This is the overview on the guidance, and I have also put you the link to this guidance where you can have a look at. Suggested objective 3 is POPs contaminated sites are secured and where feasible remediated in an environmentally sound manner. The recommended activity option would be first, train personnel in the assessment, securing and remediation of contaminated sites. Then secure high priority sites to prevent further human exposure and environmental release. Identify available remediation technology and develop strategies for the environmentally sound management and remediation of POP contaminated sites. Objective 4 would be a countrywide database for POP contaminated sites is established, and relevant co-pollutants are also considered. Here, first, assessment of database system for contaminated sites in selected countries, and then selection of a database methodology and the creation of a database of contaminated sites integrated into a general national database of contaminated sites, or if you don't have that on general national contaminated sites, then you can start with POPs, and then afterwards you can add other contaminated sites like mercury contaminated sites or other pesticides contaminated sites and so on. Coming to further action plans, here on information and education and awareness. The first one is on information exchange and stakeholder involvement related to Article 9 of the Convention, and an action plan on public awareness and information and education on Article 10. The successful implementation of the Stockholm Convention on POPs in a country will only be achieved when the relevant stakeholders, including policymakers, industry, workers, science community, civil society, and general population, are sensitized on the nature of POPs and other hazardous chemicals and their effect on human health, the environment, and also the related costs. By raising awareness among stakeholders, the necessary commitment can be reached to achieve the objective of the Convention. Information needs to be targeted here for specific stakeholders. Awareness activities on POP should be linked to awareness activities on general chemical safety. This means also this is a very good synergy with the global framework on chemicals, but also awareness programs on public health and on green economic development, as well as awareness program on sustainable consumption and production. They are all aimed at broad awareness raising strategies for sustainable development. The complexity today of the meanwhile 37 POPs and their use require also education of the stakeholders, not only awareness. So here background, first to the information exchange and stakeholder involvement. This activity is supporting and establishing a system for exchange information on POPs at national, regional and international level, referring to Article 9 and 10. Due to the increasing number of POPs and associated complexity, close information exchange on regional, international level is needed. So here the suggested objective 1 is information exchange on POPs in the country is established, considering regional and international information sources. Recommended activity options would be develop of a mechanism that information generated in Stockholm, Basel and Rotterdam Convention and the Global Framework on Chemicals is screened for the relevance for stakeholders in the country and the information is compiled. Then development of a mechanism that information on POPs from the party with regional or international relevance are communicated from the country to the Basel and Stockholm centers and to the BIS Secretariat. This means it's not only one way. Also, when you have interesting POP information in your country where you find in what kind of products and so on, you find the POPs, also this information then can be sent to the Basel and Stockholm Convention, considering here the clearinghouse mechanism on information. Then access to POP information for national stakeholders is accepted. Recommended activity options are establish a mechanism and possibly a website through which stakeholders can access key documents and relevant information on news on POPs, also other chemicals of concern. Evaluate Stockholm Convention documents and decide if some documents should be translated. Today, many of the documents are unfortunately not translated in UN languages, but today the translation tools are also better and you can, let's say, develop halfway quickly reasonable translations. Then improved information exchange on POPs at the national level between the stakeholders. recommended activity option is here: facilitate a dialogue on POPs and other hazardous chemicals between policymakers, science and industry, and possibly other stakeholders. And when it comes to public awareness and information and education, so here the objective one is that stakeholders are aware on the risk posed by POPs and POPs related global framework on chemical issues of concern, and are educated that they can contribute to reduce and eliminate the risk of POPs to human health and the environment. So here, suggested activity options are: first, compile state-of-art awareness and education material on POPs and related JFC issues of concern, as well as basic information on hazardous chemicals, including GHS classification. Adapt awareness and education material on POP and other chemicals of concern, tailor-made for target groups, because the information for policymakers is very different from the information what industry needs or what workers needs or what the public needs. So here it would be good to adapt education materials. Implement tailor-made training on POPs control and management for inspectors, customs and environmental police, and also stakeholders groups that are directly exposed. Here you can look to the individual action plans where we have this kind of awareness and training also in the individual action plan on the POPs. Integrated POPs and hazardous chemicals in the environment education syllabus of basic and secondary schools. And implement communication activities, raise awareness on POPs and POP-like chemicals, dissemination of information in different media outlets, and training targeted to stakeholder groups and to the public. I just give you one example where I think real good awareness materials is developed and good awareness is conducted. So this is, for example, the POP contaminated egg awareness from International Pollutant Elimination Network as best practice. And I have found in my workshop that POP contaminated food impacts everybody, and it's really ideal for awareness raising of all stakeholders. So sometimes after my workshops, I ask to participants, so what kind of did you hit? And then they said, yes, I mean, these polluted eggs. And here, IPEN showed that dioxin levels and dioxin and PCB in free-range eggs at all metal industries and all e-waste recycling sites they evaluated around the globe were contaminated with dioxins and PCBs, and the levels were above EU maximum limit. So the consumption of just one egg exceeds the tolerable daily intake of a child. So here, these POP levels in eggs leading to exceedance of tolerable daily intake is also a good science-based reason for priority activities for POP control in action plans. For example, here, BAD-BEP is needed to reduce dioxin releases in incinerators and metal industries, because you see in all developing countries in the areas close to incinerators and metal industries are contaminated in the eggs. So we invited the International Pollutant Elimination Network to this webinar to give some insights into their awareness activities and materials, which is the next presentation. But first I come to the second objective of awareness raising. So here key stakeholders are made aware of and knowledgeable about alternatives to POPs and are introduced to green and sustainable chemistry. Here, compile information materials available on alternatives to exempted POPs and green and sustainable chemistry, and select and adjust. We have here guidance documents of Stockholm Convention, but on the green and sustainable chemistry, we have also here this from UNEP, the Green and Sustainable Chemistry Framework Manual, and I would recommend you to have a look to that. Establish education on green sustainable chemistry and on POP and POP-like chemicals for curricula of secondary and tertiary education. This means also including universities, and I have included here several links of good universities, but also links to the ISC3 and the green screen on chemicals, which I recommend you to have a look at. And then develop information material on alternatives to POPs and on green and sustainable chemistry for relevant stakeholders. Also, we have published here publication on substitution of chemicals with recommended practice. I put you here just the web link. Also, the OECD has a substitution and alternative assessment toolbox for chemical and nanomaterial substitution. I also have put you the link, and also in Germany, the German government have developed a website on substitution in a governmental institution, and I have also put you the link because they have many case studies on the substitution. So due to the large challenge with PFAS pollution management and restricted activities of some countries and the European Union and ECHA, which proposed a restriction of all PFAS, I just give you here PFAS alternative as one example. Because in Europe, the legislative proposal is that all PFAS should be restricted and there should only be essential uses allowed. And therefore, in addition to Stockholm Convention PFAS alternative guidance, large efforts are underway to compile information on alternatives of PFAS, including also the POP PFASs, but also other PFASs. So here I have put you the link of the European Zero PM project, which published the first version of a PFAS alternative assessment database. Then the OECD compiles information on PFAS alternative and publish reports. The US Executive Office of the President published a PFAS report in 2023, this means under Biden, including alternatives. And also there are NGO information material, for example, from ChemSec, and I have put you the link. Okay, that was first presentation, and I hand over to Therese, or if there is any question, Fabien, we can also address a question.
Thank you very much. I think we will take questions at the end of the presentations to give enough time to our colleagues from and speakers from IPEN. So thank you very much, Roland, for this very in-depth presentation. We'll take questions a bit later. So I hand over to you, Therese Carson and Ms. Goar Kojayan. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen here. I hope it's visible for you all. Thank you all for organizing this, and thank you to Roland for presenting all of those facts. My name is Therese Carlson. I'm a science advisor for IPEN, and we are an international network with almost 700 organizations working in more than 130 countries for a toxic-free future for all. Now, IPEN was formed around the Stockholm Convention when the Stockholm Convention was negotiated. So we've been working with POPs ever since then in different ways. And among other things, this work includes participating in the evaluation of new POPs. It includes doing studies in articles and also on the management of POPs wastes. And in all the work that we do, what we really try to achieve is to bridge science and policy and to bridge local and global perspectives. And we do this through, for example, in developing IPEN quick views and guides to new POPs before policy meetings, and also publishing different briefs and reports on these different aspects of how to manage POPs. And during this presentation, I'm going to try to guide you to some of the things that we have available that might be useful, I think, especially for awareness raising, but also in developing different steps of your NIPs and your action plans. So as Roland mentioned, one of the things that we've been working a lot with in IPEN is egg samples. So we've been sampling eggs, especially together with Arnica, one of our member organizations, has been really driving this work. So we've been monitoring eggs for 2 decades now. And this work is really useful because not only are eggs really great passive samplers for POPs and great for awareness raising, it also gives us a lot of data and knowledge about POPs. So, for example, as mentioned, the highest contaminated egg had such high concentration that it just takes one egg to exceed the tolerable intake for a child. And but aside from those really scary data, it also gives us more practical knowledge on what can we do about this. So we can, for example, see in our studies that one of the things that needs to be addressed is the open burning of wastes, because this is contaminating our food and with POPs. We can also see that ashes from incineration of wastes needs to be better managed, because this is also an important transport pathway of POPs into our food systems. It's clear that more robust action is needed to manage articles and wastes that contain POPs, including brominated flame retardants and PCBs, since many of the waste management practices can lead to the unintentional formation of other POPs, such as dioxins. And we can also see the importance of investigating and securing contaminated sites. And here, Arnika has done a really excellent job in creating an overview of some of the data that we've collected over the years on contaminated sites. Now, of course, this doesn't cover all those contaminated sites in the world, but it is useful to get an overview of some of the challenges that are seen in different regions. And if you click each of these symbols, you can find more information about different studies that have been taken in different countries, different regions, and on different types of contaminated sites. Still with the egg studies, another thing that these studies have given us is a deeper understanding for how much of the toxicity, the dioxin-like toxicity that comes from brominated dioxins. Now, chlorinated dioxins were listed already amongst the first POPs. They are some of the most toxic chemicals that we know of, and it is clear that it is still a challenge to address them. Brominated dioxins are still not listed under the Stockholm Convention. They are being evaluated now, and we can see that brominated dioxins come with the same types of concerns as chlorinated dioxins do. So this shows the importance of closing this regulatory gap in dioxins, since this also contributes to the dioxin-like toxicity. It also shows the importance of preventing exports of e-wastes and plastic wastes to countries where there's no infrastructure to take care of them, because this ends up being a very important pathway for it, since e-wastes often have brominated flame retardants in them, and during treatment, this will release dioxins, or the brominated dioxins specifically. Again, it highlights the importance of managing ashes from different incineration practices, and also the importance of preventing recycling of plastics that contain brominated compounds, because we can see that recycling activities of brominated plastics lead to the formation of brominated dioxins. So aside from the eggs, there's also other media that we've done quite a lot of studies in. One of them is plastics. A lot of the POPs that have been listed and identified so far are used in plastics. Now, there's, of course, pesticides, which are also extremely important. And then there's the ones that are industrial chemicals. And of those, most or maybe all are used in plastics, or found in plastics at least. So we've done a lot of studies on chemicals in plastics, not only POPs, but this is a database of the studies that we've done for the last few decades. So here you can go in and you can look for specific POPs and by choosing the chemicals highlighted. And then you can see if there's any studies in your region or in your countries that might be of interest for awareness raising or for developing NIPs and action plans. One of the examples that I wanted to raise is this study that we did a few years ago, where we looked at toys from 10 different countries. Now, we wanted to look at if they had chlorinated paraffins in them. And at this point, short-chain chlorinated paraffins had been listed under the Stockholm Convention, but medium-chained had not yet been. But we found that all of the toys that we tested across all of the countries contained both short-chained and medium-chained chlorinated paraffins. And many of them contained them in concentrations up to several percentage. So several percentage of the weight of the toy were these harmful pops that at least some of them had already been listed for elimination. None of them were labeled for the presence of toxic chemicals. Now, that was not a surprising finding. We know that transparency and traceability is a challenge, but this really highlighted how much of a challenge it is. Because under the convention, as many of you will know, there is a requirement for parties to develop strategies for identifying products and article in use and wastes that are contaminated or contain chemicals that have been listed. But this is, of course, very hard. There are a lot of technical challenges associated with it, and one of the biggest challenges is the lack of transparency and traceability. And another consequence of this is that you will have chemicals that have been listed under the convention that are supposed to be phased out, they're supposed to be eliminated, but then they're present in plastics that are being recycled. So then we end up reintroducing these chemicals again on the market, including in toys, which we're seeing quite a lot of studies coming out where we can see that pops are being reintroduced into toys due to recycling practices. Now, for some chemicals, it's easier to address this. For brominated flame retardants, for example, there's at least some efficiency in the sink and float approach. But for other chemicals, that's really hard to address, such as, for example, UV328, which is present in plastics, but which is, you can't tell that it's likely to be present in a specific type of plastics or not. Not as easily as with some of the other pops. And I think these things are really floating up higher up on the agenda now, that the importance of finding ways how to strengthen global cooperation and harmonization to ensure transparency and traceability. There have been discussions under POPROC, as I think several of you might have been a part of or sent submissions for. And in those discussions, we see that a lot of countries are highlighting that the chemicals that are listed with some sort of identification criteria are being identified more. So for future listings, we would recommend that this identification criteria should be included, especially if there's exemptions. And as Roland noted, the list of exemptions is growing for listings. And on that, I think this also highlights the importance of really keeping the exemptions as narrow as possible, because otherwise you end up with huge waste streams that need to be controlled and that needs to be traced for a long period of time. But overall, we can see that it's cheaper to ensure that there's transparency throughout the life cycle than to try to test everything at the end of the life cycle. It's cheaper and more efficient to try to work on ensuring transparency across. And finally, I also want to mention that once you have identified POPs in articles or in waste or in stockpiles, then there's of course the additional challenge of how do you manage these POPs. And my colleague has done a lot of work on trying to look into what are suitable methods for managing POPs and stockpiles. So we have this information that you can find online in a few different languages. on non-combustion technologies. And the reason that non-combustion technologies are often a good option is because that then you don't end up forming new POPs in the management of the waste POPs. And with that, I will thank you all for listening. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Gohar, who is an IPEN co-chair and who is also a communication specialist for Armenian Women for Health and a Healthy Environment, who will be telling us a little bit about how her organization has been working with awareness-raising activities and NIPs in Armenia. Thank you very much, Gohar.
Thank you very much, Therese, for your beautiful presentation. And I thank Roland for very detailed presentation. And I will try to show how all the recommendations done by Roland can look in practice. How we can do that in countries. I will bring examples of my organization. Armenian Women for Health and Healthy Environment was founded in 1999 and almost immediately became a participating organization of IPEN. And our mission is, of course, women and their health and the health of children. And we look primarily at the health impacts. We're very much concerned about the carcinogenic, neurological, endocrine disrupting properties of many of the POPs. And being a women's organization, we also look at promoting women in decision making, empowering them at all levels. So in the next slide, we will see that my organization is involved not just because of our interest, as I mentioned, and our mission, but we are also working very successfully with the government of Armenia as NGO focal point for Stockholm Convention and member of the National Steering Committee for the Stockholm Convention. And in this capacity, we of course participate as an organization to the BRS meetings of the conferences of parties. But in the country now, we're currently engaged in the awareness-raising part of the ongoing GEF enabling activity project, which is review and update of the National Implementation Plan for the Stockholm Convention in Albania, Armenia, and Kazakhstan. And we carry out awareness-raising activities just as was advised by Dr. Roland. We are creating and disseminating information materials. We are using materials created by the Stockholm Convention National Focal Point, by the BRS Convention. We're using very interesting and useful as we find it game, which is Next Exit. I will show you how we're doing this. And we're organizing seminars and webinars. Now, information materials. What is very important for Armenia, for example, is to have the materials in Armenian language. So we have developed a number of information materials, which you can see. These are booklets, for instance, on the implementation of Stockholm Convention, leaflets on PVD and PCB. We have leaflet on endosulfan, all in Armenian language, and list of POPs. And as we are a women's organization, children's working for the health of women and children, you see that our major concern is impact, the health impact. And everywhere you can see that they are highlighting health impact of each and every of these POPs. On the next slide, I will briefly show our beautiful experience with the Next Exit game. Many of you may have seen it and some may have used it. At the BRS Convention COP recently, it was distributed even, and we were lucky to have it from our Stockholm Convention Regional Center, Resetox, which helps us implement this project in Armenia and guides us on that. And we try to use this game, but it is in English. And the advice from the from Resetox, from the Stockholm Convention Regional Center, was to find a school where there are children who are English speaking, find the teacher of science who is English speaking. Well, that was a bit difficult, and also it's kind of discriminatory. And we thought that why not to have a presentation? We developed a presentation in Armenian language that first introduces to the game, and then those who have just basic knowledge of English are able to play. And we brought it outside Yerevan, outside the capital city, went to the, you see, in villages, for instance, one was Nigavan in Aragazutan province, went to Kotak province in Arzakan village and played this game with children. But what is very beautiful about this game, that you can play with adults, because adults, in every adult, we have part of child, the sleeping. So we're able to wake up this child, and we played with our stakeholders in the Yerevan Center for the Aarhus Convention, which the Convention on Access to Information in Europe, as you may know, many of you. So we played with the adults, and it was quite successful. And I encourage those who haven't played, just use it. And it was really very successful, and we will continue doing that. On the next slide, you will see that we are doing seminars, of course. We are concentrating on stakeholders, different stakeholders outside the capital. And we are working, for example, if it is POPs, pesticides, of course, you have to look at the students of Agriculture College. We went to Spitak, which is in Lori province, one of the faraway provinces in Armenia. Then we went to Armavir province to talk to young women farmers in Artashen. And Armavir is one of the provinces that is using lots of pesticides. It's one of the agricultural big provinces. And there we have got stockpiles of obsolete pesticides, a notorious province for that. And then in Yerevan city, we talked, since it is about health impacts, we talked to the Erebony College medical students. So these are various stakeholders that we try to identify, and we will continue going in this direction, identifying the stakeholders and bringing this knowledge to each of them. And finally, if you look at the next slide, you will see we're also doing webinars, but the webinars also we're doing different approaches. If you see one of the webinars with what's far away province Sunik in city of Sisian, there are just 17 people present. Then in Geharkunik province, 8 people, but then you see 32. And that was also in Geharkunik. How we managed to do that? Because we went to a classroom and we just projected on the screen. It was just one person, our health expert, Knarik. She was sitting in front of them on the screen, and the entire classroom was able to participate. So there are different ways of engaging different audiences. That's it for me. For the next slide, I would just to mention how we're doing the dissemination of information, also using the mass media outlets and using the opportunities, well, not very good opportunities that come up. For instance, recently we had a problem with air pollution in Yerevan because of the burning of a landfill of Nobarashen for municipal solid waste. And there our experts spoke about, for instance, the problem with the dioxins. This is a national coverage, national television. And finally, next slide, I would just want to mention that the Stockholm Convention is, as you can see from all the presentation, it's a definitive global instrument for assessing, identifying and controlling some of the most hazardous chemical substances to protect human health and the environment. But for us, as a small organization that works in a small country, without PRS conventions, this opportunity for us to work with the government of Armenia would not have existed, and we are really very grateful for that. And we appreciate very much the great work that is being done by Green Growth Knowledge Partnership that provides all the excellent platform for learning and sharing. And we are grateful to the Stockholm Convention Regional Center in Brno, Talks for guidance in this beautiful work. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much for this very interesting, inspiring presentation. I would like to suggest that we continue with the second part of Dr. Weber's presentation on activity options for action plans. But I want to invite everyone to please post your questions in the chat or in the Q&A section of the platform. I'm taking note of all the questions that are being raised, and then when we have that space for Q&A, we can just address them for each of the presentations. So please don't hesitate to post your questions, and they will be addressed after the presentations. The floor is yours, Dr. Weber. Thank you.
Yeah, Fabian, thanks very much. You can see my slide?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So the second part of my presentation is only addressing three further action plans. So this is on effectiveness evaluation, on reporting, and on research development and monitoring. I will not specially come to this technical and financial assistance. There is also another webinar from GGKP on that topic. So on effectiveness evaluation, which is Article 16, here Article 16 of the Convention requires parties to establish mechanisms to provide comparable monitoring data on the presence of POPs. And the main matrices here selected for the Stockholm Convention for the assessing the effectiveness is human milk and is air. So therefore, the first objective would be national POPs data for human milk or blood and air are generated. The recommended activity option would be monitoring of POPs in human milk or blood by participating in the global monitoring plan or by a national program. I have put you here the link to the website of the Stockholm Convention, to the global monitoring plan, and also the link to this book publication of all the human milk data generated over the last more than 20 years, which is published with open access. Then the second activity would be monitoring of POPs in air, either by participation in the global monitoring plan or by a national or regional program. Second objective suggestion, the effectiveness of national implementation of the convention is evaluated. Recommended activity options would be develop own national implementation performance criteria, assessment of the own implementation and progress performance. And here on the BIS website, you have actually let's say the major points for effectiveness evaluation here for a country. Release for intentional production and use are eliminated or reduced. Unintentional production is eliminated and reduced. Stockpiles and waste are eliminated or reduced. Environmental levels of POPs are decreasing over time. So just by effectiveness of Stockholm Convention implementation by a party can be measured and documented by evaluation and release based on robust inventories which you are developing. And when you consider these, you can, let's say, also address this effectiveness evaluation for your own country. Then on reporting, Article 15. According to Article 15, parties are required to report every 4 years on measures taken and on their effectiveness in meeting the objective of the Stockholm Convention. So this action plan therefore aims to collecting and collating all information relevant to the provision of the Convention. So here the objective would be a mechanism for Article 15 reporting is in place, and Article 15 reports are submitted in time. Activity options would be developed in establishing a national mechanism for complying with the reporting requirements and setting up responsibilities for data compilation and filling the reporting form, and compiling information for Article 15 reporting, updating inventory and other information, and submit report to the Secretariat considering the reporting timeline. Now with the electronic toolkit, where also the tables of the reporting are included, this can really go hand in hand. The next national reporting deadline is by end of August, but it's already opened on 15th January, and you can do your 6th reporting. Then last action plan on research, development and monitoring, Article 11 of the Convention mandates parties to undertake appropriate research, development, monitoring and cooperation pertaining to POPs and where relevant to their alternatives and candidate POPs. So here a science policy interface is crucial for controlling chemicals, but also for BAD-BEP, for waste and resource management, and for environmental governance. In the action plan for the individual POPs groups, in the other 3 webinars, monitoring and research were already included. When writing your action plans, it can be decided if the POP-specific monitoring research activities for specific POPs are included in the POP-specific action plans, or if all monitoring and research is included here in the action plan on research development and monitoring. Suggested objective 1 is research capacity is developed or corporations are developed to assess and evaluate POPs and other hazardous chemicals, synergy with global framework on chemicals in a country. And here recommended activity options would be identify institutions with the potential to undertake research into POP and other hazardous chemicals, strengthen national scientific and technical research capacity and infrastructure to evaluate and then research on POPs. And here Article 11 already give you a good list what kind of, let's say, research topics would be interested here for the Stockholm Convention: source and releases into the environment, present levels and trends in humans, environment, environmental transport, fate and transformation, and so on. So here to develop and facilitate networks among identified research institutions on national levels, but also on international levels and on regional levels. Because today with our 37 POPs groups for developing countries, it's nearly impossible to have all the analysis capacity in the country. Yeah, so here you need to look for regional activities and possibly for international cooperation to generate data in your countries. And this is, let's say, highlighting 2 webinars which we had on that topic. So here we had a POP research needs and opportunities roundtable for Africa and one for Asia. And you can access these webinars and look to the different researchers. Also, there were a range of research groups which offered to cooperate to generate, for example, data in Africa or Asian country. Objective 2 would be analytical capacity is developed or cooperations are established to monitor POPs and other hazardous chemicals. Activities options would be assessment of first of the analytical capacity needs, and then develop laboratory capacity for POP considered relevant for the party. So when you develop your NIP, you see what kind of data are missing, so where analysis would be needed, and let's say these would be also your target compounds afterwards, and then identify partners for POP and chemicals of concern research on regional and international level and establish cooperations. Objective 3 suggestion: POP monitoring data needed for implementation of the action plans and NIPs are generated, and here the activities, the monitoring of action for the action plans of the individual POPs groups are executed. Then objective 4 is an operative science policy interface on chemicals and waste contributing to decision making is established in the country. Yeah, you know, at the moment there is a science policy panel established on international level. I have also put you here the link to the UNEP website, to a recent webinar, but also to scientific paper on this global science policy panel. But it's also important that you in your country have this kind of cooperation between policymakers and science. So therefore, recommended activity options are assessment of the gaps and improvement needs of current science policy interfaces in decision-making in your country, and establish and improve the science policy interface for chemicals, but also for waste and resources, for the assessment, for assessing the impact of POPs and other hazardous chemicals to the SDGs and other indicators, ecosystem services, and other policy drivers. And objective 5, capacity for socio-economic assessment, life cycle costing, and external cost for policy making is established. Recommended activity options would be here: compile information and develop capacity on socio-economic assessment, on life cycle costing, external cost of POPs, and also other hazardous chemicals, and develop and contribute information on life cycle cost, external cost, socioeconomic assessment to the science policy dialogue in the country and possibly internationally. Why do I highlight these costs? Because today only money drives. Yeah. So if policymakers do not understand what kind of costs chemical pollution has, they might not really move. The same, what kind of costs is impacting if you do not have a real waste management in your country. So this is just one example about the external cost of PFAS and short-chain PFAS in Europe. So this was developed by PFAS researchers and journalists, and they have developed a legacy scenario where they only looked to the long-chain PFAS, basically the PFAS. And here they estimated that over 20 years, the external cost for this PFAS would be close to 100 billion euro for Europe, especially because of these contaminated sites, drinking water, and so on. Yeah. And then they developed a second emerging scenario. And in this emerging scenario, they also included short-chain PFAS, which are not listed in the Stockholm Convention, but which are already included in the global framework on chemicals. And here they estimate that the cost would rise to 2 trillion euro in the next 20 years. Yeah. So a phase out of these difficult to remediate emerging PFAS would be needed to lower here this 20 years estimate. Otherwise, remediation cost over 20 years, 2 trillion is 100 billion euro per year. Yeah. And this is the reason why Europe is taking so strong measures to control PFAS, which I introduced you before. Also, the European Commission just published 2 weeks ago a similar assessment, the societal cost of PFAS pollution in European Economic Area. So here the estimate is that human health costs for PFOS, PFOA, PFNA and PFXS, this means the Stockholm Convention POP, is estimated to close to 40 billion per year in 2024 alone. So you see here also what economic reasons we have, but you need research, you need science, you need assessment, you need health data, you need monitoring data that you understand this. Yeah, but I recommend you to have a look at it and then consider what you can do in your countries. Then objective 6 is research and assessment of alternatives and substitution to POP, considering green and sustainable chemistry is established. So before, this was just when I mentioned it before in the action plan, that was to have green and sustainable chemistry in your curricula. So here, this is now real hardcore research. The recommended activity option is compilation of information on alternative assessment and research and alternatives, and develop research into green and sustainable chemistry and alternatives to POPs and other hazardous chemicals. Yeah. And last activity is assessment of essential use and promotion of elimination. Because when you look here to the hierarchy for hazards of chemicals, yeah, substitution is not the top. The top is elimination. Yeah. And for elimination, you can look to the essential use concept and promote this elimination. Because in addition to substitution and circular economy, reduction of unnecessary chemicals and unnecessary plastics need to be a priority and need to be also a part of sustainable consumption. This will reduce chemical release and exposure, and it is the best way that humanity can return to stay within planetary boundaries. Because you see here the planetary boundary concept, this is the space where human can thrive and the Earth can thrive, but now for climate, for biodiversity, and unfortunately also for novel entities, which includes plastic and POPs chemicals, we are already over our boundaries. And therefore, reduction and elimination need to be also one priority, yeah, and is a higher priority than substitution. And in my opinion, role models are here the national policies like Ecuador, constitution, including sustainable development, also the sufficiency economy of Thailand, or the ecological civilization of China, where sufficiency need to be an inherent part. And you have here the science policy advice on the essential use concept. The science community published a range of policy advice papers and studies on the essential use concept for hazardous chemicals, with also a suggestion of a strategy to identify non-essential uses. I have included for you here the different papers you can have a look at. And then when you understand this, when you implement it, then you can also here have the top of the hazardous risk, the elimination, and decide what kind of uses are actually not needed. The same is true for plastics. So also here I link you to a paper from the Scientists Coalition for a Strong Plastic Treaty. So they have published the essential use concept for the Global Plastic Treaty on non-necessary use of plastic. Thank you for your attention. Back to you, Fabienne.
Thank you very much once again, Roland, for this in-depth presentation. So I would like to suggest that we move to our next, and again, trying to save time for questions. I see that Therese has already addressed one of them, but let's move on with my colleague Michaela Paun. I would like to hand over to you, Michaela, where we are going to be talking about strengthening chemicals and waste management through sectoral approaches and about the interlinkages between the Stockholm Convention NIPs and other international conventions, as well as the global framework on chemicals. Thank you very much, Michaela, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabienne, and thank you to all the previous speakers for insightful presentations. Just maybe as a recap, so as you may know, Chemicals and Health Branch and through my unit, we are supporting the NIP Global Project on components 1 and 2, which are related to basically providing the knowledge and information for developing, updating the NIPs. And my presentation today is basically building on one of the work that we have done in the context of this project, and it is part of the report that, as Fabienne mentioned, is to be launched soon. But I think it fits very well into today's webinar topic, which is on cross-cutting issues. So, yes, let me move to the next slide. So my presentation basically will focus on these interlinkages with between the NIP and all other relevant international conventions, but also, how NIP fits into a more sectoral approach. And why we talk about this, just to basically build on what was just said by Roland. So we have this triple planetary crisis. As you know, UNEP defines as climate change, natural and biodiversity loss, and pollution and waste crisis. And we know that, for example, POPs contribute to the long-term pollution, bioaccumulation affecting biodiversity. Emissions are also linked to climate impacts. Therefore, is the idea that the NIP should not be an isolated document, basically. It should be integrated into the country's broader sustainability strategies. And you will see that my presentation will explore how NIPs under the Stockholm Convention can serve as basically strategic platforms for the broader chemicals and waste management. And Today I will explore, I will talk about more the linkages with the Global Framework on Chemicals, synergies with the Basel, Rotterdam, Minamata Convention, Convention on Biological Diversity, and Climate Change Framework Convention and Montreal Protocol. But also talking a bit about the sectoral approach as I was mentioning. So now, basically, NIPs are we know they are required under the convention, and if you are party to the convention, basically you have an obligation to develop and update your national implementation plans. But we know that the NIPs already include, for example, legal framework review, institutional assessment review, inventories of POPs listed under the convention, and also action plans, right? Therefore, all these are making the NIPs as powerful vehicles, for example, to move into the implementation of the Global Framework on Chemicals objectives at the national level. And also GFC, we know, provides the global direction for the chemicals and waste. And many of the targets are basically kind of address through the NIPs. And here I'm talking about the legal frameworks. We generate data, we look into alternatives, we do capacity building as well. And that basically contributes to the implementation of the objectives under the framework, Global Framework on Chemicals. Now I will just go through the objectives and try to briefly flag what are the potential linkages and connections. So we know that the objective A of the GFC basically established the foundation for sound management of chemicals through legal frameworks, into institutional mechanisms, and capacity development. And when we look at NIPs, as I said, they serve as practical vehicle to advance on this objective. NIP guides countries to update legal frameworks and chemicals profile, for example, to reflect the full life cycle of POPs. And this experience basically can be leveraged to strengthen broader chemicals management legislation and align with the GFC objectives. For example, technical infrastructure that we detail in the NIPs, right, based on in the NIP update process, covering POPs assessment, measurement, alternative prevention, management, destruction, provides a ready-made platform for managing other hazardous chemicals and waste. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can build on this mechanism that is the NIP and that is there for years now. Also through NIPs, we actively engage with industrial sectors like electronics, transport, textiles, and so on and so forth. We do this through awareness raising, capacity building, and this basically supports target A3 of the GFC, for example. And look at implementing a life cycle risk prevention in industry, as well as it links to target A7, which is looking at phasing out highly hazardous pesticides and replacing with safer alternatives. And then, of course, it was mentioned by Roland, we have the links with the BAT and BEP standards, right? That in the framework of the Stockholm Convention, we are required to implement those. Also, through the NIPs, we look at the illegal trade and enhancing the regulatory control over exports of restricted POPs, for example. And basically, yes, there is also a link with the health aspect, and we are also looking at POPs through the chemicals risk prevention approach as well. So just to conclude on this one, it is for me clear, and I hope for you as well, that the NIP framework and offers basically a tested operational platform to implement Objective A of the GFC. enabling countries to build their capacity, strengthen institutions, and extend sound management of chemicals across the life cycle, which goes into the same direction with the global framework on chemicals. Then looking at objective B, there is also strong alignment with the objective B. For example, NIPs require countries to assess systems for evaluating, for example, new chemicals and chemicals already on the market. So we know that this is captured in the NIPs usually. And we look into this when we update our NIPs to see how these systems, if they are in place or not, or what needs to be done to put it in place. And then, for example, this directly supports target B1 on generating and sharing chemical property data, for example. And also, there is the option of the parties under the Stockholm Convention to nominate new substances for POPs listing, which triggers this scientific review of POPs through POPs review, POP-RC, so POP review committee. And there is the science policy interface is well established and could inform broader GFC processes, for example. Then we have POPs inventories developed under NIPs that provide detailed information of chemicals in production, in products, in waste streams and releases. And this supports the transparency along value chains, for example, that GFC is mentioning in target B2 and target B3. And POPs are among the best investigated chemicals globally, if we are to say so. And there is publicly accessible data across the life cycle. Then there is also in our NIPs and through the mechanism under the convention, there is the monitoring aspect, right? So we have the global monitoring plan that generates data on background environmental monitoring and biomonitoring, including in many low and middle income countries, for example. And this provides basically a practical model for the GFC, and it gives it has great potential to be expanded, for example, to monitor additional chemicals of concern, right? Yeah, so I think I listed some other linkages here. Maybe I will not go through all because the time is short, but I think there is connection with the GHS implementation, labeling of POPs containing articles and so on and so forth. Then when we look at objectives C, for example, many current issues of concern, including PFAS, highly hazardous pesticides, endocrine disrupting chemicals, chemicals in electronics, in other products, are closely linked to POPs, POPs being present in or exhibiting this type of characteristics, right? And this means that countries are often already addressing these issues through inventories, regulatory control, substitution efforts, and waste management measures. And so we very well know this. So, for example, rather than creating parallel structure, countries can build on existing NIP processes and incorporate additional issues of concern where relevant. So we have seen, through the practice that, for example, NIP is serving as an operational entry point to broaden POPs management towards wider chemicals of concern that are listed under the, are mentioned under the GFC as well. And this basically contributes to ensuring coherence, efficiency, and reduce duplication. Then objective D, which refers to safer alternatives and sustainable solutions. Yeah, so this basically provides an opportunity to scale up innovation, circularity, and environmental protection across key economic sectors. And as I mentioned already, so NIP already requires parties to, look into substituting banned POPs or listed POPs, restricted POPs with several alternatives. And this directly basically supports the sustainable chemistry and innovation objectives and targets under the GFC. And we know that the convention applies to the full life cycle, right, of POPs. And of course, there are other connections, like through the Basel Convention, where we promote sound management, environmental sound management of waste, and also extended producer responsibility, which leads towards supporting the circular economy approaches. And yeah, I think we can recognize that many of these things are already captured under NIPs and in the context of the Stockholm Convention. So therefore, when your country is looking into meeting these objectives under the GFC, you don't need to start from scratch. You can use NIPs to provide an operational legal grounded framework that can be leveraged and expanded to advance safer alternatives and sustainable solution. And also beyond POPs, as I was mentioning earlier. And then Objective E focuses on enhancing implementation of the sound management of chemicals and waste through resources, partnership, and integrated approaches. And NIP already offers a practical framework for this objective. As I said, we target major sectors impacted by POPs, and we look towards integrating POPs management, for example, in sectoral plans and budget. And these efforts provide a tested approach, right? How to mainstream sound management of chemicals and waste in line with the GFC objectives. And yeah, there are also other elements that I mentioned here, but I will not go into depth. You can receive this presentation and dive into it. And soon the report will be launched and you can also read in more detail. And then sectoral approach. I mentioned several times why is this why it matters, right? So in the context of this NIP Global, we came forward with this sector specific guidance. We know that so far the BRS Secretariat guidance is going chemical by chemical, but from practical point of view, we have demonstrated through this sector specific guidance that is more efficient to address and inventorize, for example, and then addressing through the action plans, the POPs through, how should I say, sectoral lens, right? Because several POPs are present in more than one sector, right? Different POPs are present in electronic, construction, transport, textiles, and so on and so forth. So, basically, trying to tackle and move away from chemical by chemical type of approaches is much more effective in this, I mean, during these days when we have limited resources, both financial and human resources to address these topics. Okay, so now moving forward. So just briefly on few words about synergies with other international conventions. So yes, Basel and Stockholm, we know they are linked because it has been mentioned today. POPs are present in different plastic fractions across electronics, transport, construction, textile, and so on. And tracking these substances is critical to prevent environmental contamination and also prevent re-entering into other products that are afterwards put on the market, right? And we know that Basel Convention provides us with a legally binding framework for managing, for example, plastic waste. They have technical guidelines on ESM. Basically, the idea is not to work in silo, is for the two conventions and two work streams to be linked as to efficiently address the POPs waste, right? A Rotterdam Convention, we know that there are links to trade, or it is linked to trade of hazardous chemicals and control through the prior informed consent procedure, right? This basically ensures that exporting countries notify importers before sending chemicals listed in Annex 3. And we know that several POPs are also included in Annex 3. I mean, they are regulated both in Stockholm and in Rotterdam, Annex 3. And by aligning the NIPs, countries can synchronize the Stockholm Convention exemptions needs, for example, with Rotterdam import consents, improving regulatory coherence. We have seen that most of the time in country context, the two focal points are not really talking to each other, and they are reporting separately, and then there is kind of inconsistency when looking throughout the reports sent to the BRS Secretariat. Of course, here there are many challenges remaining. Many POPs lack specific custom codes, are present as, for example, unlabeled additives in products. And as I said, notification between focal points are sometimes inconsistent. So I think leveraging these synergies and trying to address these remaining challenges will avoid duplication and strengthen the implementation of both conventions. And then looking at Minamata, the link with Minamata, we know that mercury and POPs are often found together in sectors like electronics or vehicle or some building materials. And this overlap allows us to develop, for example, joint inventories when possible, ensuring that both pollutants are tracked efficiently. Several emission sources like waste incinerators, metal industry, cement plants, and so on release both mercury and unintentional POPs. So here comes into play the application of the BAT and BEP measures that could simultaneously reduce emissions of both substances, right? So integrating synergies, for example, between national implementation plans and national action plans, and the Minamata, for example, updates increase efficiency and avoids duplication of efforts while strengthening this multi-pollutant management across sectors, right? Then linked to the biodiversity, so Convention on Biological Diversity, we know that POPs and chemical pollutants, including POPs, are significant drivers of biodiversity loss, threatening nearly 1 million of species worldwide. And Stockholm Convention assesses POP not only for persistence and bioaccumulation, for example, but also for potential impacts on biodiversity. And also here comes into play also the link with the GFC, which all are converging towards supporting integrating chemicals and waste into national biodiversity strategies or action plans in line with the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework as well. And in there we have, if I'm referring to one particular target there, target 7, which is linked to reducing pesticides and hazardous chemicals, chemical risk. So there is even stronger connection. So yes, and then link with the climate change and the Montreal Protocol. So several POPs, particular intention POPs, are released from sources that also emit greenhouse gases, right? Such as waste burning, industrial fuel use, and POPs often occur with high global warming potential substances like CFCs and HCFCs. And then also present as well in electronics, insulation foams, vehicles, right? So they come from similar sources. And basically this creates an opportunity to align Stockholm Convention NIPs activities with climate policies under the Climate Convention and Montreal protocols. So one example could be integrated inventories and management that can cover POPs containing plastics, F-gases, and insulation foams, improving recycling, safe destruction, and circular economy outcomes. So this is one example. But you see more on my slide. And then I think this is my last slide. So there is also important connection with Sustainable Development Goals. So as I said, the NIP should be integrated in the national sustainable development strategies. Basically, managing POPs contributes to several SDGs, including the ones related to health, to food security, water safety, urban sustainability, but also SDG 12, which is directly linked to promoting environmental sound life cycle management of chemicals and waste, right? So there is a strong connection and contribution to different SDGs. Yeah. So I think that's it from my end. So thank you very much. And if there are any questions, I will be happy to respond. And also I would like to thank Roland for contributing to this publication that is to be launched soon. So he worked closely with us to be able to develop and soon to release this publication. So thank you, Roland, for that.
Welcome, Michaela.
And thank you very much, Mihaela, Roland, and to all our speakers and participants. And indeed, we look forward to this new publication being released. We have just, well, a few minutes, and maybe we can stay for an additional few minutes connected. Please, if you have any question, do share your question in the chat or in the Q&A. And I'm just looking at what we have right now. I know that one of the questions was already addressed.
The one was on hexachlorobutadiene. It was the question about where does it come from? I mean, when you look to the structure of the perchloroethylene, you see that you just need to couple two perchloroethylenes in the production. So this is just unintentionally formed by condensation of two perchloroethylenes. And actually, hexachlorobutadiene was never produced as a single chemical. It was always only produced in this kind of solvent production of pearl and dry. And but this can have as a side or unintentional product up to 5%. And therefore, in this production of the chlorinated solvents, it was then separated by distillation. And still, when you look today to the publication of Professor Gurui Liu, which I mentioned, you see that still today, there is this separation by distillation, and still this distillation is not perfect. This means at the end, still some hexachlorobutadiene is in the product, but the major is remaining in the waste fraction because it's more heavy.
Thank you very much, Roland, for this answer. I don't see any hand raised, or I don't see any new question in the chat, but there was a question about the trade name for products and detergents containing HCBD used in dry clean.
Yeah, no, you know, it's so you just look for perchloroethylene, PELC. Yeah, so often it's just used the synonym PELC, PERC. yeah, and perchloroethylene. So this is a major solvent used in dry cleaning, yeah, and this also contain a bit, and the concentration you see in the publication I linked to of hexachlorobutadiene in it. What is the
Great.
TDI? No, there's a question.
All
What
right.
is the TDI? This is tolerable daily intake. You know, for pollutants, you do an evaluation at what concentration you consider it acceptable or that you do not get real harm. And this is then calculated by how much dioxin or how much of PCBs you can ingest per day or per week. Yeah, tolerable daily intake means per day, but Europe today is calculating this as a tolerable weekly intake. And you can also Google then the levels of tolerable weekly intake published by FAO or by the European Union.
Great. Earlier in the session, there was a question about how to effectively participate at country level to support the implementation of NIP. I think there were, many illustrations in the presentations about how to participate, but I don't know if our
Therese?
speakers want to elaborate a little bit on that. I don't know who was asking the question, unfortunately, so I'm not exactly sure from where this question was asked, but I think there is a lot to say about, stakeholders, engagement, and coordination. So please feel free to address this question too.
Therese?
Sure, I can start. I already wrote some things in the Q&A box, but I think this question is so important, but also extremely context dependent. So it depends on, in some countries, governments love to collaborate with civil society and get technical expertise from civil societies. In some countries, it's different. And they have their own experts internally that have a lot of expertise. And I think it's really about figuring out in your national context, what are the gaps, what is needed, and what are your skills and interests, and try to fit in that. Like as Gohar mentioned, like it can be bringing POPs games to schools to raise awareness. It can also be translating information materials. Or it can be if you have a technical expertise or if you're an organization that has a lot of technical expertise, to focus on the technical work around, for example, managements of POPs in articles and wastes. So it depends a lot on your background, on your interests, I would say. But there's a lot of things that are needed for sure.
Many thanks. There is, I actually see that there is another question on the Q&A box, which is about, I don't know, Roland, if you can see it, about non-combustion technologies. Maybe it's more for you, Therese, non-combustion technologies for plastics.
I made already a link on the non-combustion technologies because, I mean, Therese, you said it has the advantage that it don't generate unintentional pops. I mean, this is not true, actually. So I wrote 20 years ago, I wrote a review article on combustion tech or pop destruction technologies and the assessment of dioxins. And I put the link into the chat where you see I evaluated all different non-combustion technologies in respect to dioxin formation potential. And of course, they have their dioxin potential. As soon as you have dioxin precursor and you have a temperature, or even it can be biological or UV, you can form dioxins. Yeah, so therefore, you have a look to my review article. I put the link in the chat to the research gate. There you can download a version.
But maybe, Therese, you would like also to address this question, since I think it was referring to your presentation.
Sure, thank you very much. I think that these were the materials that my colleague have been preparing on non-combustion technologies and their pros and cons go into quite a lot of detail. Unfortunately, I am not personally familiar with those details, so I would need to refer to that publication, but I'm happy to share a link in the chat. Thank you.
Yeah. No, there's the question in the chat about non-combustion technologies and the PBDE in plastic. Yeah, so that's also one issue, that most non-combustion technologies have been developed for PCBs and for chemicals. Yeah, so normally they treat small amounts, and as soon as you have this in 10,000 tons of plastic, there is non-combustion technology which can treat this huge amount of plastic waste. So here you would, for example, one option is that there is a dissolution technology where you can dissolve the plastic and separate the polymers and the brominated flame retardants. But there is only one full-scale facility for this in the whole world. And then afterwards, then you can treat the fraction which contain these brominated flame retardants also with different technologies. Yeah, but if you at the moment, like I said, the solvent technology, there's only one full scale. This means all Africa, all Asia don't have any of these technologies. So therefore, at the moment, for this brominated flame retardant in plastic, you cannot use non-combustion technologies. Yeah, it cannot handle this huge amount of waste. Yeah, like I said, one option is cement kiln, but also cement kiln are not too happy about the halogens. So you can only, let's say, include a certain amount of plastic containing bromine or chlorine in a cement kiln, and then also the cement kiln might get challenges in operation.
Thanks. I see a last question in the chat about the toxic lead in products such as paints and plastics.
Which one?
We're asked about the toxic lead in products such as paints and plastics. That's from Michael Muzenga in the chat.
Might it be lead?
Lead. Sorry for my pronunciation.
No, that's okay. It could have been lead or lead, either way. I'm not sure what this question is in regards to. Lead is definitely used in plastics and paints, especially.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure
Yeah,
what
but
the question is.
there is a global activity, and if Michaela is there, actually she is for UNEP working on the global activity on lead in paint and eliminating lead in paint. So maybe Michaela, you might add a bit on this.
Yeah, sure. I was reading the chat because I wanted to make sure I understand the question. Yeah, so UNEP is together with WHO, we are leading the Global Alliance to Eliminating Lead Paint. So we have a web page, and I will put the link in the chat for anyone that is interested to explore more. And I mean, we produce a lot of knowledge as well. We have a model law that countries are using, for example, when they are diving into basically regulating the lead in paint, and they are using this model law to do that in the process. We have also put forward guidance on reformulation of paints. We have also carried out several pilots with SMEs, where they tested, if this reformulation is possible. And conclusion is yes, reformulation is really possible, and SMEs are encouraged to do this, because this is one, how should I say, mechanism to comply right with lead paint law that is put in place in one country. And we also, I mean, look beyond, okay, so you have enacted your lead paint law, but that it doesn't mean that it's automatically enforced. So for that, we put forward another guidance, for example, supporting countries with enforcement and compliance with the lead paint laws, and that is rolled out in several countries. So that is another instrument to help addressing lead in paint. So paint being, of course, one of the lead sources, we are working from UNEP side across other sources, like lead, addressing lead in lead acid batteries, right, and their waste. And also recently we are also looking into the presence of lead in cosmetics, which it's of interest to us because there is an opportunity to link it with UNEP's work on addressing mercury in cosmetics. So, I mean, to go beyond, as I said, chemical by chemical approach and looking, you know, in cosmetic as a sector, looking to the different chemicals present there. Of course, cosmetic may have PFAS and other chemicals as well, but yeah, I think this is kind of a model that we try to put in place. So you start with addressing one chemical, but then you expand to other chemicals of concern. Yeah, so I think this is in a nutshell what we are currently doing.
Yeah, one addition on the plastic. So you have also lead and cadmium in plastic as stabilizer, especially in PVC. This means the PVC, which is used, for example, for window frames. The older ones contain cadmium and lead. And also polyurethane foam can contain mercury from the production because you use a mercury catalyst for production, which is now substituted in some regions. So we have developed the sectoral guidance with GGKP, and I put it in the link. And in this sectoral guidance, we did not only address the POPs, but also for construction, for electronics, and for the transport, also lead and mercury and some other chemicals of concern. So please have a look to this sectoral guidance. It's quite useful in this respect.
And if I may build on what you said, Roland, about the PVC and the presence of other heavy metals. We recently published for UNEA 7 report on heavy metals, where we are also explaining the connections or the presence of these heavy metals, including in PVC pipes, and how, you know, the regrettable substitution happen when they switch between different metals as stabilizers, as you said. So that is available. I can look for the link and put into the chat so people can read that report as well.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to have to close this webinar because we're already almost 15 minutes over time. But this shows, you know, how much interest and how rich all those presentations were. I want to thank you once again and thank all the speakers and the participants. This was extremely informative, and thank you as well for sharing all the resources in the chat. I want to also invite everyone to continue the discussion online through the NIPs community of practice in the Green Forum. Please use that space to continue asking your question and continue exchanging knowledge and resources. There is also a chance to meet with other members of those communities of practice. Sumin has now put the link in the chat, so it's perfect. And we'll also further communicate by email about the Green Forum and how to participate in the discussion on today's topic. Please also use the Green Forum to share insights on what is happening in your countries. We are really here to exchange knowledge and experience and challenges and solutions. and learn from each other. Finally, I wanted to maybe take this opportunity to mention the NIPS clinics that are more regional and closed small group consultations that are led by Dr. Weber or Roland. Sorry, I've been calling you Roland and Dr. Weber.
That's fine. No worries.
So for those who are directly involved in developing and updating NIPs, yeah, we're happy to answer questions and invite you to those NIP clinics whenever you need advice on your own NIP, and we can do that through the regional centers. By the way, we will have tomorrow, if I understand correctly, a session for countries in Africa. And with that, again, thank you very much, everyone. Let's keep in touch. Thank you, Roland. Thank you to all our speakers and participants. We're very grateful for your insights and participation. And I wish you a very nice day or end of the day, depending on where you are. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Yeah, bye. Also, thank you, Goha.
Thank you.
Bye.